Snow drifted softly over Brooklyn, tinting the windows of the river caf with a silver haze. Inside, everything sparkled: crystal glasses, candlelight, and laughter from tables wrapped in the glow of Manhattan's skyline. But for Grace Miller, the world felt frozen. Her husband, Eric Hayes, sat across from her in his tailored Armani suit, scrolling through his iPhone with an indifference sharp enough to cut glass. He hadn't said a word to her since the appetizers arrived. When the waiter approached with a small ivory envelope, Grace thought it was the bill. Instead, Eric slid it across the table and said coldly, "Merry Christmas, Grace. This is your freedom." Her breath caught. Inside was a divorce agreement dated, notarized, and waiting for her signature. The man she had given 5 years of her life to wanted to end it at the exact moment carolers outside sang Silent Night. "Eric, not here," she whispered, her voice trembling. But he only leaned back, flashing a hollow smile. "Why not? You've embarrassed me long enough. Let's make it official." A man at the next table, gray-haired, in a modest waiter's uniform, paused as he poured wine for another couple. His eyes flicked toward Grace, filled with something strange, almost pained. But before she could process it, Eric reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black Montblanc pen. "Go on," he said. "It's just a signature. One more formality." Pard. Tears welled up in Grace's eyes. Around her, the restaurant continued to buzz, people toasting love and laughter, while she sat drowning in humiliation. Her hands trembled as she held the pen. The ink bled slightly as she signed her name, Grace Miller, sealing the end of her marriage on Christmas Eve. Eric smirked, tucking the document back into his briefcase. "See? That wasn't so hard." He raised his glass of champagne to himself, not even glancing at her. Across the room, his new assistant Sloane Reed watched with satisfaction, pretending not to notice. Grace's chest burned as realization hit. They'd planned this together. The waiter returned quietly, setting down a new glass of water. His hands were steady, his voice low. "Mom, are you all right?" She managed a faint nod. The man's expression softened, almost protective. He slipped a folded napkin beside her plate before walking away. Grace didn't open it until she stood outside, under the falling snow. Inside, in elegant handwriting, were just 3 words. "He doesn't know." Grace looked back through the frosted window. The waiter was gone. Only the city lights remained, shimmering on the East River. She wiped her tears, unaware that this stranger and the secret behind those 3 words would soon turn her shattered world upside down. She thought she had lost everything that night, but the truth waiting behind that note would make every tear worth it. Snow whipped across the Brooklyn Bridge like a white veil, clinging to Grace's black coat as she walked aimlessly through the freezing night. Her heels clicked against the pavement, each step echoing the words she couldn't stop hearing: "Merry Christmas. This is your freedom." Freedom. The cruelest gift she'd ever received. She tried to call a cab, but her iPhone battery blinked red and died. She stood under a flickering street lamp, feeling smaller than she ever had in her life. Cars rushed by, full of people heading home to warmth and laughter. She had nowhere to go. Then, a black Mercedes S-Class pulled up beside the curb, its headlights slicing through the snow. The tinted window rolled down slowly, revealing a driver in a charcoal overcoat and black gloves. "Miss Miller?" he asked politely, voice deep and steady. Grace froze. "Who are you?" "I was asked to pick you up. It's not safe out here." Her instincts screamed no. But something about the man's tone wasn't threatening, it was respectful, almost protective. The car's interior glowed with a soft amber light, warmth spilling into the night. "Who sent you?" Grace asked. The driver handed her a small envelope embossed with gold initials. BW. Inside was a business card. Benjamin Whitmore. Whitmore Capital Holdings. Beneath it, in the same elegant handwriting as the napkin from dinner, were the words, "Please, get in. You're safe." She hesitated, gripping her cold hands together. The name Whitmore felt distant, familiar somehow, like a memory she couldn't place. Finally, exhaustion won. She slid into the back seat, the leather warm against her frozen skin. The city lights blurred past as the car pulled away from the bridge. "Where are we going?" she murmured. "To the Plaza Hotel, ma'am," the driver replied. "Mr. Whitmore wishes to meet you there." Grace blinked. "The Plaza? She couldn't imagine why a billionaire would want to see her, a woman who'd just been humiliated in front of half of Brooklyn. The driver kept his eyes on the road, the snow reflecting off the windshield like falling stars. Grace studied his profile, the steady lines of a man who'd seen much but spoke little. "Do you know Mr. Whitmore personally?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I've worked for him for more than 20 years. There was a pause. Then he added, "And for your mother, before that." Grace's breath caught. "My mother?" The driver glanced at her through the mirror, his expression unreadable. "Yes, ma'am. I was assigned to keep an eye on you after she passed. Mr. Whitmore insisted you were never to know unless something happened that required his protection." Grace felt her pulse quicken. "Why now?" He sighed, eyes flicking toward her reflection. "Because," he said, "the moment you cry over a man who doesn't deserve you, it's time you learned who truly does." She stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. Her mind swirled between grief, confusion, and disbelief. "You mean he's been watching me all these years?" "Not watching," the driver said quietly. "Protecting." They crossed into Manhattan, the skyline glittering through the snow. As the Mercedes turned onto Fifth Avenue, Grace noticed a photo tucked into the console, a faded picture of her as a child, sitting on a swing beside her mother. It wasn't possible. She'd never seen that image before. She touched it with trembling fingers. "Where did you get this?" The driver met her eyes in the mirror. "From Mr. Whitmore, ma'am. He said to tell you. He's waited 28 years to see his daughter." The car pulled up under the golden awning of the Plaza Hotel. Grace's heart pounded as the doorman opened her door. For the first time that night, she wasn't sure if she was still dreaming or stepping into a truth far bigger than her pain. She didn't know it yet, but this meeting would rewrite everything she thought she knew about her past. The Plaza Hotel glittered like a palace against the Manhattan night, its grand lobby alive with soft piano music and the scent of pine and cinnamon. Grace stood beneath the chandelier, clutching her purse, as if it could anchor her in a world that no longer made sense. Just 2 hours ago, she'd been a discarded wife. Now, she was being escorted to meet a man whose name carried more power than most senators. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened to the penthouse suite, the driver gave a polite nod and disappeared down the hall. Grace hesitated before stepping inside. The suite was warm and silent, filled with soft golden light. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, throwing shadows across velvet drapes, and an enormous Christmas tree decorated entirely in white and gold. On the table beside the window sat a small Tiffany blue box, tied with a white ribbon. And beside it, an older man stood facing the skyline. His hair was silver, posture straight, suit pressed to perfection. When he turned, his blue-gray eyes met hers with a calm that pierced through her confusion. "Grace," he said quietly, his voice deep, steady. "You look just like your mother." She froze. "I think there's been a mistake." He smiled gently, walking closer. "No mistake." He gestured toward the Tiffany box. "Your mother asked me to keep that for you. For this night." Grace's throat tightened. She sat down carefully, her hands trembling as she untied the ribbon. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a folded document and a silver locket. The locket held a photograph of her mother holding a newborn baby. On the back, engraved words read, "For Grace, when the truth finds her." Her vision blurred. Why would you? Benjamin Whitmore sat opposite her, his face solemn. "Because your mother didn't want you to grow up in this world. The world I built." He nodded toward the document. "That's her will. She left you something far greater than money." "One." Grace unfolded the yellowed paper, eyes scanning the words. It was indeed her mother's handwriting, steady and familiar. Near the bottom, her heart skipped. The will stated that if Grace ever shed tears on Christmas Eve because of betrayal, all assets tied to the Whitmore estate would transfer to her. Her breath caught. This can't be real." "It is," Benjamin said softly. "She made me sign it 28 years ago. I thought she was being sentimental, but she always saw farther than I did." Grace blinked back tears. "You're saying my mother was part of Whitmore Capital?" "She helped me build it," he admitted. "She was my partner in business and in everything else. But when she became pregnant, she wanted you to have a normal life. She left, and he stopped, pain flickering across his face. "I let her go." I thought I was protecting both of you. Grace shook her head, overwhelmed. You could have told me. I've spent my whole life thinking I was no one. I wanted to tell you, Benjamin said, leaning forward, voice trembling. But your mother made me promise. She said the truth should only find you when you've lost everything else, so you'll know what truly matters. The firelight flickered across Grace's tears. She held the locket tight, the weight of it pressing against her heart. And now? She whispered. Benjamin's eyes softened. Now, my daughter, it's time to take back what's always been yours. Outside, snow continued to fall over Fifth Avenue, each flake glinting like a promise. Inside, Grace felt the first spark of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. But the night wasn't over. Because the letter contained one more secret, her mother had hidden a name that would change everything again. The following morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the Plaza Suite, spilling over the silk curtains and landing on Grace's tear-stained face. She hadn't slept. Every word Benjamin Whitmore had spoken the night before replayed in her mind like a movie she couldn't pause. You look just like your mother. Take back what's yours. By the time she stepped into the grand lobby, Benjamin was already waiting near the revolving doors, wearing a charcoal overcoat and a dark scarf. He looked nothing like the powerful billionaire splashed across Forbes covers. He looked like a father trying to make up for lost time. Breakfast? He asked, voice low but kind. Grace hesitated, clutching the Tiffany locket around her neck. You don't owe me anything. He smiled faintly. That's where you're wrong. I owe you everything. They walked outside together. The morning air was crisp, the city humming to life around them. A black Mercedes awaited at the curb. Grace recognized the same driver from last night. He gave a polite nod as he opened the door. The ride uptown was quiet, broken only by the rhythmic hum of traffic. As they crossed 59th Street, Grace glanced out the window. Central Park lay blanketed in snow, peaceful and unreal. Benjamin finally spoke. Your mother, Evelyn, loved this view. We used to walk through here every Sunday before the world knew who I was. He smiled, wistful. She said wealth means nothing if you can't sit on a park bench and breathe. Grace stared at him. Why didn't you fight for her? For me? Benjamin's jaw tensed. Because I didn't understand love then. I understood ownership, control. She left to protect you from that. Silence filled the car. The truth hurt, but it made sense. When they reached Park Avenue, the Mercedes pulled up before a limestone building that seemed to touch the sky. The doorman greeted Benjamin with a respectful nod. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, oil paintings, an elevator that opened directly into a penthouse. Grace stepped inside and froze. The apartment was vast, flooded with light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, while a grand piano rested near a fireplace adorned with old family photos. One photo made her chest tighten, her mother, laughing, holding a newborn her. I kept everything she left behind, Benjamin said softly. Letters, photos, the house in Maine, even her violin. I couldn't let go. Grace walked slowly around the room, tracing her fingers along the piano keys. You've had all this, and I was barely surviving. He turned toward her, guilt flashing in his eyes. I thought I was honoring her wishes. I didn't know Eric until recently. Her head snapped up. You knew him? I knew of him, Benjamin admitted. When he filed your divorce papers, his name came across one of my company's due diligence reports. Something about his finances didn't add up. Grace frowned. He works in marketing. Why would that reach you? Benjamin hesitated, then handed her a folder from his briefcase. Because he was trying to secure funding through a shell company using your credit history as collateral. Grace's stomach dropped. She flipped through the pages. Loan applications, bank transfers, forged digital signatures, all bearing her name. He stole from me, she whispered. He used you, Benjamin corrected. But he's not the only one. Grace looked up sharply. What do you mean? Benjamin's gaze darkened. Your mother's will mentioned a silent partner. Someone she trusted to protect her estate if anything happened to her. That partner disappeared 20 years ago until last month, when his signature appeared on Eric's contracts. Grace's voice trembled. Who is he? Benjamin's lips pressed into a thin line. A man named Richard Hale. My former CFO, and your godfather. Grace staggered back, clutching the folder to her chest. The world tilted. Her godfather, her mother's old friend, had conspired with her husband. Benjamin stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "We can expose them both, but only if you're ready to face what comes next." Grace swallowed hard, staring out the window at the city below. For the first time in years, she felt something stronger than fear resolve. And as snow began to fall over Park Avenue, Grace realized her mother's legacy wasn't just wealth, it was courage. The next morning, Grace woke to the muted sound of the city traffic below, the faint hum of life filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Park Avenue penthouse. For the first time in days, she felt the warmth of safety, but also the weight of revelation pressing on her chest. Her husband had betrayed her. Her godfather had deceived her mother. And the man she'd met less than 24 hours ago was her father. She found Benjamin in his study, seated behind a mahogany desk stacked with neatly arranged folders. Sunlight caught the edges of his Mont Blanc pen as he signed papers with steady precision. He looked up when she entered. "You couldn't sleep," he said, more as a fact than a question. Grace sat opposite him, her eyes tired but determined. "You said you had proof that Eric used my credit. I need to see it." Benjamin nodded and slid a thick file across the desk. "Read carefully. It's worse than you think." The file smelled faintly of ink and cedar. Inside were bank statements, digital screenshots, and confidential memos. Grace's eyes widened as she read line after line: loan applications, wire transfers, and false signatures linking her name to overseas accounts. "He used a fake consulting firm," Benjamin explained, "registered under your social security number. Every dollar he borrowed was laundered through Hale's offshore company in the Cayman Islands." Grace stared at the pages, her heart pounding. "So Eric wasn't just lying to me. He was setting me up to take the fall." Benjamin nodded grimly. "If those accounts had been audited before last night, you'd already be under federal investigation." The words sent a chill down her spine. She closed the file slowly, fingers trembling. "How did you even get this?" Benjamin leaned back in his chair. "I have resources. But more importantly, I have loyalty. Some of my people never stopped watching Richard Hale after he left. When Hale reappeared with Eric's name in his paperwork, I knew something was wrong." Grace's throat tightened. "My mother trusted him. He was supposed to be family." "He was," Benjamin said bitterly, "until greed consumed him. Your mother's estate included stock options in Whitmore Capital. Hale was her trustee after she passed. He used those shares to gain leverage until he saw an opportunity through your marriage." Grace stood, pacing near the window. "So all of this, my marriage, my humiliation, it was business to them." "Power," Benjamin corrected softly. "They saw you as a key to unlock the one thing they could never control. Your mother's clause." Grace turned sharply. "The clause in her will?" Benjamin nodded. "If you shed tears on Christmas Eve, the assets would transfer to you. Hale must have discovered that years ago. But he couldn't trigger the clause, only your pain could." Grace's knees weakened. "So Eric marrying me was part of a plan?" "Yes," Benjamin said quietly. "They thought they could manipulate destiny." For a long moment, Grace said nothing. The truth burned too deep. Then she straightened, the fire in her eyes returning. "If they wanted me broken, they're about to regret it." Benjamin's lips curved into a faint, proud smile. "That's your mother's voice right there." He opened his drawer and pulled out a small leather-bound book. This belonged to her. She wrote everything: names, dates, meetings. "There's a page you need to see." "How?" Grace flipped through the faded pages until she found it. "If something happens to me, Richard Hale will try to control Grace's future. If Benjamin ever finds this, tell Grace to trust no one except the driver." Grace looked up, stunned. "The driver?" Benjamin nodded. "His name is Samuel. He's been protecting you your entire life." Grace felt her world tilt again. She remembered Samuel's calm eyes in the rearview mirror, the quiet care in his voice. Benjamin leaned forward, voice low. "Samuel knows more than either of us. But there's one more thing: you're not the only one Hale and Eric betrayed." Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" Benjamin opened another folder, this one marked confidential. Inside was a photograph of Sloane Reed, Eric's assistant, standing beside Richard Hale at a charity gala. Grace's blood ran cold. "Sloane?" Benjamin nodded. She's Hale's daughter. The room went silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock. Grace's tears dried instantly. Every lie, every humiliation now made perfect sense. She wasn't just betrayed by a husband, she was trapped inside a conspiracy built before she was even born. That night, the city glowed in gold and white as Grace sat alone by the penthouse window, staring out at Manhattan. Below her, Fifth Avenue shimmered with holiday lights, but inside her chest was a storm. Eric's betrayal was one thing, but learning that Sloane, his polished, smiling assistant, was Richard Hale's daughter made everything far more dangerous. Grace clutched her mother's leather notebook, tracing her fingers over the faded handwriting. Each page felt like a map leading her deeper into a world she hadn't asked to enter. Somewhere inside, her mother had written, "When they smile too easily, that's when they're most dangerous." A soft knock pulled her back. Benjamin entered, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed her one and sat across from her. "You've been reading that for hours." "I can't stop," Grace admitted. "Every page feels like she's still here, warning me." Benjamin nodded. Evelyn was always 10 steps ahead. But Hale is patient. If his daughter is involved, that means they're planning something bigger. Grace looked up sharply. Sloane works for Eric. What could she possibly want now? Benjamin leaned forward. Information. Access. If Hale's assets are frozen under investigation, they'll need yours. That makes you a target again. Grace's heart thudded. So I'm still part of their game. Until we end it, Benjamin said calmly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin file. Inside were photos of Sloane leaving an upscale clinic in Soho, her coat buttoned tight, her face pale. "She's pregnant," he said simply. Grace's eyes widened. "With Eric's child?" Benjamin didn't answer, which was enough of an answer. Grace stared at the photo, anger flooding her chest. "She took everything from me, my marriage, my peace, and now she's carrying his child." Benjamin's tone softened. "Don't let rage drive you, Grace. Use strategy. That's what they'll never expect." She took a long breath, steadying herself. "So what's next?" He smiled faintly. "We start by knowing our enemy. Samuel's been watching Hale for years. He'll follow Sloane now. And you." He paused, studying her face. "You're going back to your life. Act as if nothing has changed. Let them think you're broken. That's when people reveal the most." Grace hesitated. "You want me to see them again?" "I want you to let them see you," Benjamin said. "But on your terms." Later that evening, she stood before the mirror, tying her hair back into a sleek ponytail. She wore no makeup, no armor, just calm resolve. Picking up her iPhone, she scrolled to Sloane's number. Her thumb hovered, then pressed call. The line clicked. "Grace?" Sloane's voice sounded almost surprised, sweetly casual. "I thought we should talk," Grace said evenly. "Woman to woman." A short pause. "Now?" "Now." 20 minutes later, they met at a quiet cafe near Columbus Circle. Grace arrived first, choosing a corner table. The city buzzed outside, snow drifting past the window. When Sloane walked in, she looked perfect as always, red coat, designer heels, a faint smirk. "I didn't expect you'd want to see me," Sloane said, sitting down. Grace smiled faintly. "You're right. But sometimes the best way to clean a wound is to face what caused it." Sloane's brow arched. "Is that what this is? Closure?" "Truth," Grace replied. "You deserve to know Eric's lies caught up to him. He's under investigation. The Whitmore name is involved now." For a flicker, Sloane's mask cracked. "Whitmore?" she repeated. Grace watched her carefully. "Does that sound familiar?" Sloane recovered quickly, shrugging. "I don't know what you're talking about." Grace leaned in, lowering her voice. "Then maybe you should ask your father. I'm sure Richard Hale has plenty to explain." The color drained from Sloane's face. She stood abruptly, knocking over her coffee. "I don't know who told you that," she stammered. "But you don't understand." Grace rose too, eyes sharp. "I understand enough. Tell your father this. I'm done being the pawn. The game's changing now." As Grace walked out into the falling snow, her pulse thundered. She didn't look back, but she didn't need to, because behind her, Sloane Reed had just realized the woman she helped destroy wasn't broken anymore. And somewhere in Soho, Richard Hale would soon learn that Grace Miller had inherited far more than her mother's fortune. She'd inherited her fire. The following Monday morning, Manhattan returned to its rhythm-honking cabs, the hum of Wall Street, and the smell of roasted coffee drifting through glass towers. Grace sat in Benjamin's office at Whitmore Capital, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the winter light. Everything here screamed power. Polished oak tables, silver pens, and the soft glow of the city stretching toward the horizon. But Grace felt out of place. She'd spent years blending into corners, shrinking herself for Eric's comfort. Now she was sitting in a boardroom where decisions shaped the stock market. Her pulse quickened as Benjamin's assistant placed a folder before her. "These are Eric's holdings," Benjamin said. "And this," he tapped the folder's cover, "is how we end his empire." Grace looked down. Inside were bank reports, property documents, and investment portfolios that tied Eric's company directly to Hale's network. "You said he's being watched," she said. "Does he know yet?" Benjamin's lips curled faintly. "He's about to." A call came through the conference speaker. The screen lit up with a corporate logo, Hastings & Co., one of Manhattan's most aggressive venture firms. Benjamin pressed the button. "Mr. Whitmore," a deep voice greeted, "we're just finalizing our review. It seems Mr. Hayes is an excellent candidate for partnership." Grace froze. Eric was trying to merge with one of Whitmore Capital's subsidiaries through Hastings. Benjamin's expression didn't change. "That's interesting," he replied smoothly. "But before you sign, you should run a deeper compliance check. You might find unusual financial activity." A pause followed. The voice on the other end grew hesitant. "Is this a warning, Mr. Whitmore?" Benjamin smiled slightly. "A courtesy." Then he ended the call. Grace stared at him. "You just sabotaged his deal." "Jinazam." He turned toward her calmly. "No. I exposed him to people who value integrity. Let them decide what kind of man Eric really is." Grace felt a shiver of satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, subtle and sharp. Benjamin slid another envelope toward her. "Your name is still attached to his filings. You'll need protection. I've arranged for someone to guide you through the next steps." The door opened, and a tall man in his 30s entered. His suit was simple but well-fitted, his presence quiet yet commanding. He extended his hand. "Ethan Cole, corporate attorney." Grace hesitated before shaking it. His grip was firm, warm. "I've reviewed your case," he said. "Eric and Hale covered their tracks well, but not perfectly. They underestimated your mother's clauses. Those legal protections were genius." Benjamin smiled. Evelyn Whitmore was always ahead of her time. Ethan met Grace's gaze. "You have a choice, Miss Miller. We can go to court, or we can play their game better than they ever could." Grace studied him. "You mean outsmart them?" "Exactly." Ethan leaned forward. "You act like the woman they think they broke. Let them feel safe again. Then, when they're not looking, we pull everything out from under them." Benjamin nodded approvingly. "He gets it." Grace exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her fear turning into something else control. "So what do we do first?" Ethan smiled slightly. "First, you go back into the world. Attend events, let the press see you. People like Hale feed on perception. If you look strong, they'll panic. If you look weak, they'll strike. Either way, they'll expose themselves." Benjamin added quietly, "And when that happens, we'll be ready." Grace rose from her seat and walked toward the window, staring down at Park Avenue glittering below. Her reflection stared back, no longer the woman crying over a dinner table, but someone colder, steadier. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll play their game." Benjamin smiled with pride. "Good. Because Hale and Eric just made their biggest mistake. They taught my daughter how the game works." Grace turned slightly, her voice steady. "And now, I'll show them how it ends." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the city that had once swallowed her whole. But this time, Grace wasn't hiding from it. This time, she was the storm. The night before Christmas painted Manhattan in shades of silver and fire. Fifth Avenue shimmered beneath strings of golden lights, store windows glowing like dreams. Grace stood in front of the mirror in her father's penthouse, fastening the small silver locket her mother had left her. It glimmered faintly against her black wool coat, a quiet reminder of where she came from, and what she'd already survived. She looked composed, but inside her chest, a battle raged. Ethan's words from 2 days ago echoed in her head. Let them think they've won. Then take everything they've stolen. Grace had decided that tonight she would face her past. Not to beg or to cry, but to reclaim the power that was taken from her. Benjamin watched her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You're sure about this?" Grace nodded. "I'm not going to confront him. I just need to walk through that place once more, as someone new." He gave a small, proud smile. "Then walk in like you own it. Because, in a way, you do." An hour later, a black Mercedes stopped outside the River Café. The last time Grace had been there, she'd signed away her marriage in front of an audience. Now, the restaurant glowed with soft amber light, reflecting off the East River like 1,000 tiny stars. She stepped out, heels crunching on thin frost. Inside, the maitre d' recognized her instantly. His eyes widened, but he said nothing, only nodded respectfully. "Table for one. Ms. Miller?" "Just a short visit," she said. "I wanted to speak to the manager, if he's here." He disappeared briefly, then returned with a man in a dark suit, Marcus, the general manager who had seen everything that awful night. His face softened when he saw her. "Miss Miller, I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again." Grace smiled politely. "I wanted to thank you. You didn't have to stop the staff from recording that night. You showed me more kindness than anyone else in the room." Marcus nodded. "No woman deserves what happened here." He hesitated before adding quietly, "He came back last week with the same woman. Loud, arrogant. Some people never change." Grace's expression didn't falter. "I know, but I have." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a check to the restaurant staff fund. "For Christmas," she said simply. As she turned to leave, voices from the private dining room froze her mid-step. Eric's voice smooth, familiar, poisonous. "To new beginnings," he toasted. Grace peered through the frosted glass. Eric sat at the same table as before, surrounded by colleagues and, of course, Sloane. Her stomach twisted, but she stood still. Eric was laughing, holding Sloane's hand like she was some kind of trophy. Then Sloane looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. For a brief second, both women went utterly still. Then, to everyone's surprise, Grace smiled. A calm, knowing smile that made Sloane's confidence falter. Eric turned, startled, his expression freezing when he saw her. He rose quickly, face tightening. "Grace," he started, walking toward the door. But Grace didn't flinch. She reached into her purse, pulled out a receipt, and placed it in his hand. "The bill from last Christmas Eve," she said softly. "You forgot to pay it." Eric glanced down. The receipt bore his own signature and the credit card number of his fraudulent account. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by panic. Grace's eyes gleamed. "Merry Christmas, Eric." Without another word, she turned and walked out into the snowy night, her heels steady, her heart silent. As the door closed behind her, murmurs filled the dining room. Eric's co-workers leaned in, confused. Sloane whispered something, pale as snow. Outside, Grace pulled her coat tighter, feeling the wind rush against her face. For the first time, she didn't feel cold. Her phone buzzed a message from Ethan. "He's unraveling. You did good." Grace smiled faintly, looking back at the glowing restaurant by the river. She had walked back into her nightmare and walked out owning it. But tomorrow night, she would do more than that. She'd end it. The next morning, Christmas Day dawned quiet and cold. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of Benjamin's Park Avenue penthouse, glinting off the crystal ornaments on the tree. Grace sat on the couch wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket, staring at an unopened ivory envelope on the coffee table, the one Benjamin had given her days ago, sealed with a wax crest bearing her mother's initials. She hadn't been ready to face it. Until now. Benjamin entered the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You still haven't opened it." Grace shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "It feels like opening it means saying goodbye again." 1. Benjamin set the cups down, then sat beside her. "Sometimes, letters aren't goodbyes. They're bridges." She looked at him for a long moment before breaking the wax seal. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, one handwritten, one typed. The handwritten one was unmistakably her mother's. Looping, elegant cursive, slightly faded with age. "My sweet Grace," the letter began. If you're reading this, it means you've cried for the wrong man but found your way back to the right truth. Grace's breath hitched. Her mother's words felt alive, echoing in her chest. You were never meant to be ordinary. I hid your name to give you freedom, not shame. The world I escaped was filled with power and betrayal, and I feared it would break you before you learned how strong you are. But if you're reading this, my darling, then I know it didn't. Tears slid down Grace's cheeks as she read. The second page was a list of numbers and dates coordinates. Benjamin explained softly, leading to a safe deposit box at a private bank in Geneva. She was protecting something, Grace murmured. Something she didn't trust anyone with. Benjamin nodded. Her research files. Evelyn wasn't just my wife. She was a visionary. She discovered irregularities in Whitmore Capital's overseas accounts years ago before Hale disappeared. That's what she was investigating when she got sick. Pain. Grace's voice trembled. Are you saying she was silenced? Benjamin's jaw tightened. I've never been able to prove it. But Hale's timing was perfect. She passed, and he resigned 2 weeks later with millions unaccounted for. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the ache in her throat. All these years, and he just lived freely? Not for much longer, Benjamin said quietly. You and I will finish what she started. Grace folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. She wiped her tears and inhaled deeply. I'll go to Geneva after this mess with Eric is done. Benjamin nodded approvingly. Good, but you won't go alone. Grace smiled faintly. Let me guess, Ethan? Benjamin's eyes twinkled. He insisted. Said he doesn't trust anyone else to keep my daughter alive. Grace blushed despite herself, then stood, clutching the envelope. I have something else to do first, she said. A promise to keep. Later that day, Grace met Lena, her old friend, at a small cafe near Central Park. Snow drifted lazily outside as they sat by the window. Lena grinned, squeezing her hand. You look different. Peaceful. I feel different, Grace admitted. For the first time, I know who I am, and I know who I'm not. Lena laughed softly. That's called healing. Grace smiled, then glanced at her phone. Eric's name flashed on the screen, an incoming call. She ignored it. Seconds later, a text appeared. We need to talk. Urgent. Lena frowned. You're not going, are you? Grace shook her head. Not today. Let him wait. As she looked out at the snow-covered park, she felt her mother's presence warm, protective, eternal. The storm inside her had finally begun to quiet. But the calm wouldn't last. Because the letter had unlocked more than memories, it had also triggered a chain of events Hale and Eric could no longer control. The evening of December 26th was clear and cold, the city lights slicing through the night like diamonds. From the top floor of a glass tower overlooking Times Square, laughter spilled out of a private penthouse. Inside, Eric Hayes was in his element, smiling, charming, toasting his bright future to a room full of investors and sycophants. Sloane sat beside him, her perfect smile hiding nerves. She knew something was off, though she couldn't say what. The penthouse glittered with excessive champagne fountains, caviar trays, a massive Christmas tree twinkling beside floor-to-ceiling windows. Everyone there believed Eric was the next golden boy of the corporate world. He was about to close his biggest deal yet, a merger with Hastings & Co., which would finally put him among Manhattan's elite. He raised his glass. To second chances and new beginnings. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. His smile widened, triumphant. Then the elevator chimed. Every head turned as Grace Miller stepped out. The room fell silent. She looked breathtaking in elegant black evening dress, simple jewelry, her posture calm and commanding. For a second, Eric's confident grin faltered. He hadn't seen her since that humiliating night at the River Caf. Grace, he said, recovering fast, his tone mockingly casual. Didn't expect you'd come. You clean up nice. She smiled politely. I was invited. He frowned. By who? From behind her, Benjamin Whitmore stepped into the room, followed by Ethan Cole. The crowd whispered as recognition rippled through them. The Whitmore name carried weight. Half the men in the room had pitched business to him at some point. Benjamin's expression was unreadable. Don't stop on my account, he said coolly. I'm just here to watch how my money's being used. Eric's face drained of color. You're Your money? Ethan handed a folder to the nearest investor. Mr. Hayes neglected to disclose that several of his recent projects were funded through assets linked to Whitmore Capital, unauthorized assets. Murmurs filled the air. One investor flipped through the documents, frowning. Eric, is this true? Eric's voice wavered. This is ridiculous. I don't know what game you're playing, but Grace stepped closer, cutting him off. It's not a game. You used my identity to fund your projects. You used my name to open offshore accounts, and you forged my signature. The room erupted in whispers. Eric turned to her, desperate now. You don't understand, Hale said it was temporary. We were building something for us. Grace's expression hardened. You mean for you? Sloane's face went pale. She rose quickly. Eric? What is she talking about? Eric ignored her, trying to appeal to Grace. I did everything for us. You're my wife. Ex-wife, she corrected softly. And tonight, everyone will know what that title cost me. Ethan turned on the large projector behind them, revealing emails Eric's communications with Richard Hale, his secret transfers, his plans to frame Grace for fraud if things went wrong. Every message was time-stamped and authenticated. Sloane gasped, covering her mouth. The investors stared, horrified. Benjamin stepped forward, voice calm but lethal. Mr. Hayes, consider this your last public toast. You've not only defrauded investors, you've stolen from my daughter. Eric looked around the room, realizing no one stood on his side anymore. Security guards moved in, discreet but firm. Sloane whispered, trembling, I'm pregnant, Eric. How could you? Eric blinked in disbelief, but Grace didn't flinch. She looked at Sloane with quiet pity. Now you know what it feels like to love a man who only loves himself. Hasso. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Eric's empire began to crumble right there, under the city's glittering skyline. His phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from his lawyer. FBI inquiry opened. Assets frozen. Grace turned toward the door, her composure unshaken. Merry late Christmas, Eric, she said softly. You finally got your audience. And as she walked out into the night, applause broke not for him, but for her. For the woman who turned humiliation into justice. The next morning, sunlight poured through the penthouse windows of Whitmore Capital's Manhattan headquarters. The city below buzzed with fresh scandal. News outlets were exploding with headlines. Eric Hayes exposed in Whitmore fraud. Photographers camped outside his building. Hastings & Co. had already withdrawn their merger. Overnight, the man who once gloated over Grace's humiliation had become a corporate pariah. But Grace wasn't celebrating. She stood silently by the tall window of her father's office, watching the snow drift over Park Avenue. The skyline stretched endlessly before her, glittering and indifferent. The taste of victory felt hollow. Benjamin entered quietly, holding 2 cups of espresso. You haven't moved since sunrise. Grace took the cup, her reflection ghosted in the glass. He's ruined. But I don't feel better. I thought I would. Benjamin smiled faintly. You didn't do this for revenge. You did it for truth. That's why it hurts less like triumph, and more like peace. She turned toward him, eyes soft. Peace feels strange. He chuckled softly. You'll get used to it. They stood in silence for a moment before Ethan entered, a stack of papers under his arm. His tie was loosened, his voice calm but urgent. The fallout spreading fast. Hale's name came up in the FBI report this morning. They're requesting your cooperation, Mr. Whitmore. Benjamin nodded. Of course. He turned to Grace. You should sit in on this too. Grace frowned. Do they really need me? Ethan gave her a reassuring look. You're the key witness, Grace, and the rightful owner of everything they tried to take. They'll need your statement. Grace exhaled, trying to steady herself. Fine. Let's finish what they started. Later that afternoon, she found herself sitting in a boardroom again. But this time, she wasn't powerless. Across from her sat 2 federal investigators and Hale's former attorney, pale and sweating. Ethan stood beside her, a quiet pillar of calm. The lead investigator adjusted her glasses. Miss Miller, or should I say, Miss Whitmore, how long were you unaware of your connection to Whitmore Capital? 28 years, Grace answered firmly. Until last week, I didn't even know Benjamin Whitmore was my father." The woman nodded. "And the forged signatures on these contracts, did you authorize them?" "No," Grace said clearly. "Those signatures belong to Eric Hayes. He used my name to hide his transactions." The attorney tried to interject, but Benjamin's voice cut through the air, steady, cold, unmistakably powerful. "My daughter has nothing to hide. The real question is how many of you ignored Richard Hale's trail while he stole from this company for decades?" The room went still. The investigator cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitmore, we'll handle that internally." Benjamin leaned back, calm but deadly. "I'm sure you will." As the meeting ended, Ethan placed a gentle hand on Grace's shoulder. "You did well." Grace gave him a tired smile. "I didn't think I'd ever sit in one of these rooms again without feeling small." Ethan's gaze softened. "You're not small, Grace. You never were. You just forgot who you were standing next to." His words hit something deep in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as a wife, not as a victim, but as herself. That evening, back at the penthouse, she stood again by the window. The city glowed beneath her, endless and alive. She watched the snow swirling around the skyscrapers, her reflection stronger now defined. Benjamin joined her quietly. "You remind me of your mother tonight," he said. Grace smiled faintly. "Because I'm angry?" He laughed softly. "Because you're free." So, outside, a camera flash blinked from the street below reporters, waiting for a glimpse of the woman who had toppled an empire. Grace turned away from the window and walked deeper into the room, leaving the chaos behind her. For the first time, she wasn't running from her story, she was owning it. But she didn't know another storm was coming, one that would test not her strength, but her heart. The day of the formal hearing arrived gray and sharp, with sleet tapping the courthouse windows like impatient fingers. Grace stood in the hallway outside the federal boardroom, her palms damp against the manila folder she carried. This wasn't a criminal trial, yet, but it was the meeting that would determine whether she remained a victim on paper or reclaimed her full legal identity. Ethan adjusted his tie beside her, his calm presence grounding her. "You don't have to prove your worth here," he said softly. "Just tell the truth." Grace managed a small smile. "That's what my mother always said. The truth doesn't need defending, it just needs daylight." Inside, the conference room gleamed sterile and cold. The long table was surrounded by suits, agents, and corporate attorneys. Benjamin sat at the far end, his posture regal, his face unreadable. Across from him sat Richard Hale, older now, his once charming smile replaced by bitterness. His expensive suit couldn't hide the tremor in his hands. When Grace entered, Hale looked up and froze. "You look just like Evelyn," he murmured. Grace's voice was ice. "You'd know. You betrayed her." A murmur rippled through the room. The lead investigator called everyone to order. "Let's proceed. Miss Whitmore, your statement, please." Grace opened her folder and laid out the evidence. Emails from Eric, account numbers, forged documents, all signed with her name. "These aren't my signatures," she said clearly. "They were created to move funds illegally from Whitmore Capital's accounts to Hale's offshore holdings. My ex-husband was his operative." Hale's lawyer tried to intervene, but Benjamin cut in, his tone quiet but lethal. "Miss, Whitmore's identity was used as a cover for crimes committed by the very man she trusted and by a board member who exploited my wife's death for profit." Hale's voice shook. "Benjamin, you're twisting the truth. I built this company with you. You think she's ready to run what we built?" Benjamin leaned forward, calm as a blade. "She doesn't need to run what we built. She'll rebuild it." The investigator turned to Grace. "Do you have anything else to add, Miss Whitmore?" Grace hesitated, then drew a single sheet from her folder, the original divorce document Eric had forced her to sign on Christmas Eve. The Mont Blanc ink had bled slightly where her tears had fallen. She placed it gently on the table. "This," she said, voice steady, "was the first signature he ever stole from me. I'm reclaiming it now." With deliberate grace, she crossed out the name Grace Miller and wrote Grace Evelyn Whitmore in bold, confident strokes. The sound of the pen filled the room like thunder. The investigator nodded. "Duly noted." Hale slammed his hand on the table. "You think this changes anything?" Benjamin rose, unflinching. "It changes everything. You're finished, Richard. The FBI has your Cayman transfers, and your daughter's cooperation sealed it." Hale went pale. "Sloan?" Grace met his eyes coldly. She chose to stop lying. For once, the boardroom fell silent except for the snow ticking against the glass. Hale's attorney whispered something in his ear, but it was over. He slumped back in defeat. When the meeting adjourned, Benjamin approached his daughter. "Your mother would have been proud," he said quietly. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. "Not because I won," he shook his head gently, "because you refused to become them." As they walked out of the courthouse, Ethan fell into step beside her. "You handled that like a CEO." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm learning from the best." Ethan stopped her near the revolving doors. "You don't need to keep fighting alone anymore, Grace. Let people stand with you." She looked up at him, snow catching in her hair, her heart unexpectedly unsteady. "Maybe I will." Pam. For the first time in her life, the only signature that mattered was the one she wrote for herself. But as the ink dried, a new chapter was already waiting, one she didn't see coming. The storm cleared by morning, leaving Park Avenue glazed with snow that shimmered like diamonds under the pale Sunday. Inside Benjamin's penthouse, warmth glowed from the fireplace, the scent of cedar mingling with coffee. Grace sat curled on the sofa, wrapped in her mother's old shawl, staring into the flames as if they might show her what came next. The court had ruled in her favor. Hale's accounts were frozen, and Eric's name was splashed across every financial headline in the country. But for Grace, the silence after victory felt almost unreal. Benjamin stepped in, holding 2 steaming mugs. "Sleep at all?" She smiled faintly. "Not much. It's strange. For years, I dreamed of this moment, the justice, the truth, and now that it's here, I don't even know what to do with it." He sat beside her, handing her the coffee. "Then you live with it." "Justice isn't supposed to feel like fireworks, Grace. It's supposed to feel like balance." She studied him for a moment. "I used to think you didn't care. Now I realize you were just waiting." His eyes softened. "Waiting for you to find your strength. Your mother said if I stepped in too soon, I'd steal your story." Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. She was right. Benjamin smiled, his expression both proud and regretful. "You remind me of her every day, especially the way you walk through pain like it's just weather." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Benjamin reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "There's something I want you to see." Grace opened it carefully. Inside was a deed her mother's childhood home in Maine, restored and placed in Grace's name. She wanted you to have a place untouched by the world. Benjamin explained softly, "A home that belonged to you, not to the Whitmore Empire." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You found it?" He nodded. "Your mother never really left me instructions. But she left clues. I followed them." Before Grace could reply, Ethan entered the room, a stack of documents in hand. His smile was tired but genuine. Everything settled. The board officially reinstated Benjamin as CEO. "And the press wants a statement from you, Grace." She laughed softly. "I'm not used to people wanting to hear what I have to say." "Get used to it," Ethan said warmly. "You've got a story that can change people." Benjamin nodded in agreement. "You don't have to stay in the shadows anymore." Grace looked between them, her father and the man who'd quietly helped her rebuild her life, and something inside her shifted. For the first time, she wasn't defined by who hurt her. She was defined by what she'd survived. Ethan moved closer. "There's a press conference in 2 hours," he said. "You don't have to attend, but if you do, it'll set the record straight for your mother and for every woman who's been underestimated." Grace hesitated, then stood, her reflection gleaming in the window. "Then let's do it." Later that morning, she stood at the podium in Whitmore Capital's atrium. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, the marble floors echoing every breath. Benjamin stood beside her, Ethan just behind. "My name is Grace Evelyn Whitmore," she began. "For years, I lived under another name. I was told to be quiet, polite, invisible. But silence only protects those who cause pain. So I'm done being silent." Her voice carried across the room, steady and luminous. "This isn't just about money. It's about truth and rebuilding what's been broken, not just in business, but in people." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Benjamin's eyes shimmered with tears he refused to show. Ethan stepped closer, whispering, "You were brilliant." Grace turned to him, her lips curving into the smallest, most genuine smile. "I had good teachers." Outside, Park Avenue sparkled beneath the sun, and for the first time in years, every door that had once been closed to her was finally open. But beyond those doors waited something Grace hadn't planned for, a chance at love that might be as terrifying as it was real. The next morning, New York gleamed beneath a thin layer of frost. Grace sat by the window of the Plaza Hotel's Palm Court, her reflection mingling with the city beyond the glass. It was the same hotel where she'd first met Benjamin, only now, the girl trembling with disbelief had become a woman people whispered about with awe. Headlines called her the heiress who brought down $1 billion lie. She didn't care about the fame. What mattered was the quiet peace returning to her chest. A server placed a silver tray before her: coffee, croissants, and a small vase of white lilies. She smiled faintly. "Thank you." Across the table sat Benjamin, dignified as ever, reading the Wall Street Journal. The headline bore Eric's photo: disheveled, defeated, escorted by federal agents. FBI arrests Eric Hayes, linked to international fraud ring. Benjamin folded the paper with calm precision. He'll face real consequences this time. Prison, restitution, public disgrace. It's not vengeance, Grace, it's balance. Grace nodded quietly. He built his world on deception. It's only fair it collapsed the same way. She sipped her coffee, watching the snow fall outside. Yet beneath her composure, a strange ache lingered, the echo of everything she'd endured. Benjamin seemed to sense it. "You did what Evelyn never could," he said softly. "You exposed them." Grace's eyes shimmered. I wish she could have seen it. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "She sees you, Gracie. She always will." Before Grace could answer, Ethan appeared at the entrance, his gray coat dusted with snow. He looked exhausted but smiled when he saw her. "I figured I'd find you here," he said. Benjamin rose to greet him. "Join us, Ethan. You've earned more than 1 cup of coffee." Ethan chuckled. "I might need 3. He sat, nodding to Grace. "You were all over CNBC this morning. Everyone's calling you the calm hurricane." Grace laughed softly. "That's dramatic, even for TV." "It's accurate," Ethan countered. "You didn't just survive the storm, you became it." Benjamin's eyes twinkled with pride. "And now, it's time she learns how to steer it." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder labeled Transition Plan. "Whitmore Capital needs a new public face, someone with integrity." Grace blinked. "You mean me?" He nodded. "Not immediately, but soon. You'll shadow me, learn everything. I built an empire with walls. I want you to build one with windows." Her throat tightened. "Dad, I don't know if I'm ready." "You're already doing it," Benjamin said simply. Ethan smiled. "You've handled more chaos in 2 weeks than most executives do in a lifetime." Grace exhaled slowly, the weight of the offer settling in her heart. "I'll do it. But I want one condition." Benjamin raised a brow. "Name it." "That we honor Mom," she said firmly. "Every year, we fund scholarships for women in business under her name, Evelyn Whitmore Foundation." Benjamin's smile softened. "You have her spirit." Ethan leaned closer, his tone quiet. "She'd be proud of the woman sitting here right now." Grace met his eyes, something unspoken flickering between them. "Thank you for everything." He grinned. "Just doing my job." Benjamin rose, leaving them alone under the soft hum of piano music. Grace looked at her reflection in the window again. The woman staring back wasn't fragile anymore. She was steady, radiant, a reflection of survival and grace in equal measure. Ethan cleared his throat. "You know, when this all started, I thought you were someone who needed saving." Grace smiled, tilting her head. "And now?" "Now, I realize," he said quietly, "you were saving all of us." Her heart skipped. The world outside seemed to still, just for a moment. In that reflection, Grace saw not loss but rebirth, the kind her mother had always believed in. And she finally believed in it too. The first Monday of the new year arrived with a gray dawn stretching over Midtown. Whitmore Capital's glass tower glowed faintly against the skyline, the city still half asleep from holiday haze. But inside the 42nd floor boardroom, tension crackled like static. This wasn't an ordinary meeting. It was the first full board session since the collapse of Eric's scandal. The air smelled faintly of espresso and anticipation. Grace walked in beside Benjamin, wearing a tailored navy suit that made her look every bit the executive she never planned to become. The locket at her neck was her only piece of jewelry, a quiet tribute to her mother. Ethan stood discreetly by the window, briefing her on what to expect. "They'll try to test you," he murmured. "You're the wild card now, the heiress who took down 2 men and saved the company's reputation. Don't apologize for it." Grace smirked. Wasn't planning to. When the doors opened, 12 board members turned toward her. Some with curiosity, others with skepticism. Richard Hale's seat, still empty, loomed like a ghost at the far end. Benjamin took his place at the head of the table. Grace sat to his right. "Thank you all for coming," Benjamin began, his voice steady and commanding. "Today marks the start of a new chapter, not just for Whitmore Capital, but for what it stands for." A silver-haired woman on the left spoke up. "Mr. Whitmore, before we begin, we'd like clarification on your decision to name Miss Grace Whitmore as an executive consultant. Many feel it's unconventional." Benjamin's gaze didn't waver. "What's unconventional is how this company ignored corruption under its own roof. Grace exposed it. She's earned her seat." Grace straightened, calm but firm. "I didn't come here to inherit power. I came to rebuild trust. My mother helped start this company. Her vision was transparency. I intend to finish what she began." A younger member leaned forward. "And what exactly do you propose, Miss Whitmore?" Grace opened her portfolio and placed a binder on the table. An ethics reform initiative. Full audit of offshore accounts, third-party oversight for investment divisions, and a mentorship program for female executives. No hidden ledgers, no silent partners. Murmurs spread around the table. One older man adjusted his glasses. "That's a bold move. It'll expose weaknesses." "Good," Grace replied. "Sunlight doesn't hurt strong foundations." Benjamin hid a small, proud smile. Ethan caught her eye from across the room, mouthing, "Perfect hit." Then the door opened unexpectedly. A courier stepped in, carrying a sealed envelope marked FBI, Evidence Update. He handed it directly to Benjamin and left. The room stilled as Benjamin unfolded the papers. His brows furrowed, then lifted slightly. He passed the document to Grace. It was a notice of asset forfeiture. Richard Hale's final holdings, totaling nearly $300 million, had been seized by the government. Attached was a note. "Eligible for victim restitution. Miss Grace Whitmore, primary claimant." Gasps rippled across the boardroom. Grace froze, the weight of the number meaningless compared to what it represented. "Justice completed," one board member murmured. "That could rebuild our entire education fund." Grace looked up, steady. "Then that's what we'll do." Benjamin turned to her, eyes shining. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Money was never the victory. Healing is." Shrey. Ethan smiled softly from his corner, pride flickering in his eyes. The meeting ended with a standing vote, unanimous approval of Grace's reform plan. For the first time, Whitmore Capital wasn't just surviving, it was evolving. As the room emptied, Benjamin placed a hand on her shoulder. "You handled that like your mother would've." Grace smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'm finally becoming who I was supposed to be." "One." Ethan approached, offering her a Mont Blanc pen, ironically, the same kind that had once symbolized her pain. "Keep it," he said. "Sign things for yourself now." She accepted it, meeting his eyes with quiet gratitude. The boardroom that once felt like a battlefield had become something new, a place where her voice finally mattered. But outside those glass walls, something far more personal was waiting to test her heart again. A week later, snow turned to rain in Manhattan. The season's glitter faded into gray puddles, but Grace felt lighter with every storm that passed. She had closed one chapter: Eric's downfall, Hale's arrest, the board's trust regained, but something unfinished tugged at her. Sloane Reed. The woman who had helped destroy her marriage, and who, in the end, had betrayed her own father to save herself. Grace hadn't seen Sloane since the hearing. But early that morning, Ethan stepped into her office holding an envelope. "From the hospital," he said. "It's her." Grace frowned. "Sloane?" He nodded. "She had the baby last night. A boy." Grace stared at the envelope. Inside was a short note written in shaky handwriting. "You were right. He never loved anyone. I don't know what to do now." Grace's chest tightened. She's alone. Ethan studied her quietly. "You don't owe her anything." "I know," Grace said softly. "But I owe myself peace." 2 hours later, she stood outside street. Luke's hospital, her coat flapping in the winter wind. The maternity ward was quiet, filled with the faint sound of lullabies playing through the intercom. When she entered Sloane's room, the younger woman was sitting up in bed, pale and exhausted, her baby cradled in her arms. Sloane's eyes widened. "Grace?" Her voice cracked. "Why would you come here?" Grace stepped closer, her tone calm. "Because you asked for help." Sloane blinked back tears. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought Eric said." She stopped, shaking her head. "He said we'd start over. He told me I was different." Grace smiled sadly. "He told me the same thing once." Sloane looked down at the baby. "I wanted to believe him. I thought having his child meant I'd finally matter." Grace sat beside her. "You do matter. Just not to him." Silence filled the room except for the soft cooing of the newborn. Grace gazed at the tiny face, peaceful and innocent. "He deserves better than the lies that built his parents' lives," she said gently. "You have a chance to give him that." Sloane's lips trembled. "I don't even know how to start." "By ending the cycle," Grace replied. "Stop chasing people who only take. Be the person your child can trust." A tear slipped down Sloane's cheek. "You should hate me." Grace shook her head. "I did. For a long time. But hate keeps you chained to the same story. I'm done being a character in Eric's life." "To double." Sloane hesitated, then reached for her purse on the bedside table. "There's something I need to give you." She pulled out a flash drive. "It's Hale's backup files, contracts, offshore accounts, messages he never erased. I copied them before the FBI took his system. You'll want this." Grace took the drive carefully, her pulse quickening. "Why give this to me?" Sloane exhaled shakily. "Because I'm tired of protecting men who ruin everything they touch. You're the only one who did the right thing." Grace looked at her with quiet understanding. "Do something right for yourself now. Start fresh." Sloane nodded weakly, tears spilling freely now. "What about you? After all this, what do you do next?" Grace smiled faintly. "Live." She stood, glancing once more at the baby. "And maybe learn what forgiveness really feels like." As she left the room, Ethan was waiting in the hallway. "How did it go?" he asked softly. "She gave me something," Grace said, holding up the flash drive. "Maybe the last piece of the puzzle." Ethan smiled gently. "You really are your mother's daughter." Grace slipped the drive into her coat pocket. "No, I'm her continuation." They walked out together into the misty rain. The city lights blurred in puddles, and for the first time, Grace felt clean-washed of all the dirt that had clung to her name. But the drive in her pocket carried one last secret Hale had buried, and it was about to rewrite everything Grace thought was over. The following evening, Manhattan shimmered beneath a new coat of snow. Fifth Avenue was alive again, tourists taking photos, carolers singing the last notes of the season, taxis honking impatiently in the cold. But Grace barely noticed the beauty. Her mind was on the small silver flash drive burning a hole in her pocket. She and Ethan walked side by side through the city lights, the air sharp and clean. Benjamin had insisted they take the evening off, but neither of them could truly relax. The information from Sloane could be the missing link, something big enough to close every door Hale had ever left half open. "You've looked at it yet?" Ethan asked, his breath fogging the air. Grace shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to do it somewhere that feels real. Not a boardroom, not an office." She gestured down the avenue. "Here. In the city my mother loved." They stopped at a small cafe tucked between a Cartier boutique and a bookstore. Inside, soft jazz played, and the windows glowed golden against the winter night. Grace ordered 2 cappuccinos, while Ethan found them a quiet corner booth. When she sat down, she pulled out her MacBook Air and slid the flash drive into the port. The screen flickered to life, revealing a maze of folders, dates, financial logs, encrypted messages. Her pulse quickened. Ethan leaned closer. "Open the latest file." Grace clicked. The document was a ledger titled Project EW. Her mother's initials. Lines of transactions scrolled down. each linked to a hidden account offshore. Then, at the bottom, one note stood out, written in Hale's handwriting. Transferred under guardianship to Whitmore Trust recipient, G.E.W. Grace frowned. That's my name. Ethan blinked. He didn't just steal from her. He hid assets in your name to protect himself. Her chest tightened. He was using me, even after she died. But there was more. A second file labeled Video Record the 15th of October 1998. Grace clicked it, and the grainy footage appeared her mother, Evelyn, sitting at a desk, pale but poised. She looked straight into the camera. If you're watching this, then Richard Hale has already betrayed us, Evelyn said, voice steady. I've secured enough evidence to expose him. But if anything happens to me, Grace must never lose her faith in truth. She's my legacy, Benjamin. Protect her. Grace's hand covered her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Ethan turned down the laptop volume, letting her breathe through the emotion. She was talking to your father, he said quietly. Grace nodded, voice trembling. She knew. She saw all of it coming. Ethan placed a hand over hers. And she trusted you to finish it. For a long time, Grace couldn't speak. The calf's chatter faded into the hum of her heartbeat. Then, slowly, she closed the laptop and whispered, "Let's go to him. My father needs to see this." Outside, snow was falling again, dusting their coats. They walked together toward the waiting Mercedes parked near the curb. Inside the car, Grace stared out at the shimmering storefronts, Tiffany, Dior, and Mont Blanc glowing like beacons of the life she'd once thought she didn't belong to. "I used to think Fifth Avenue was for people like them," she said softly. "Now I realize it was always part of my story. I just didn't know my name yet." Ethan smiled. "You've earned every inch of this street, Grace." As the car turned onto Park Avenue, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "You don't know the whole truth about your mother. Meet me tomorrow at the River Caf. Come alone." Grace's heart skipped. Ethan noticed her change in expression. "What is it?" She locked eyes with him, the glow of the city reflecting in her gaze. "It's starting again." He frowned. "Who sent that?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But someone out there knows more than we do." Outside, snow fell heavier, cloaking the city in silence. And for the first time since it all began, Grace wasn't afraid of the storm. She was walking straight into it. The next morning, the city awoke under a sky of dull gray. The snow from the night before had hardened into ice along the curbs of Brooklyn. Grace stood on the pier near the River Caf, her breath visible in the cold air. The message she'd received still glowed on her iPhone screen. "Come alone." Ethan had insisted on driving her there, but she'd refused. "If this person knows about my mother," she told him, "I have to face it myself." Now she waited, wrapped in a black wool coat, the East River shimmering faintly behind her. The cafe was quiet, closed for early morning deliveries. A few seagulls circled overhead, their cries sharp against the wind. A man approached slowly from the path, a familiar figure. Samuel, her mother's old driver, the man who'd watched over Grace her entire life. His face was older now, etched with time, but his eyes were the same, steady, kind, and knowing. "Samuel?" Grace whispered, her voice half relief, half confusion. "You sent the message?" He nodded. "I had to. There's one last thing your mother wanted you to know." Grace's pulse quickened. "You worked for my father. You protected me. What else could there be?" Samuel pulled a small envelope from his coat, sealed with a blue wax crest. "This was left in Evelyn's safe deposit box. She told me to give it to you only when you'd learned to forgive." Grace hesitated before taking it. "Forgive who?" "Everyone," Samuel said softly, "including yourself." With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, her mother's graceful script once again. "My Grace," it began. "If you've reached this point, you've already faced more than I ever wanted for you. But I have one final truth. The illness that took me wasn't entirely natural. I was poisoned slowly, quietly by someone who wanted control of what I knew. But I refused to die in silence. The antidote is truth. Give it light, and it will destroy the darkness that made it." Grace stared at the words, her breath catching. "Poisoned?" Samuel nodded grimly. "Your mother knew too much." Hale feared exposure. But before she passed, she recorded a statement, A video confession. I've kept it all these years. He reached into his coat and handed her a small flash drive. The world deserves to hear her voice. Grace, you can end this once and for all. Tears blurred her vision. Why now? Samuel's gaze softened. Because you finally have the strength to carry her truth. 2. That night, back at the Whitmore Capitol building, Grace gathered Benjamin, Ethan, and the board in the main auditorium. Reporters had already caught wind of the meeting. Cameras lined the back wall. The atmosphere buzzed with tension. Benjamin stood at the podium first, introducing his daughter. For years, our company was haunted by secrets, he said. Tonight, those secrets end. Grace stepped forward. Her voice was steady, even as her hands trembled slightly. My mother's death was not just a tragedy, it was a silencing. But she left behind her words, and today, the world will hear them. She inserted Samuel's flash drive into the projector. The lights dimmed, and Evelyn Whitmore's face filled the screen. Richard Hale orchestrated my illness, Evelyn said in the recording, voice calm but firm. He wanted me gone before I could expose the laundering within Whitmore Capital. But I trust my husband, Benjamin, and my daughter Grace will finish what I began. Truth is our inheritance. Gasps filled the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Ethan stood frozen, awed. When the video ended, Grace looked out over the crowd. This company will no longer be built on silence, she declared. My mother's voice will guide every decision we make. The Whitmore name will stand for truth. Free. The room erupted into applause, real, thunderous applause that echoed through the glass walls. Benjamin's eyes glistened as he whispered, "She did it, Evelyn." Ethan caught Grace's hand gently. "You just gave her justice." Grace exhaled, tears shining like diamonds. But outside, as snow began to fall again, one camera light stayed on long after the others dimmed because someone, somewhere, wasn't done watching her story unfold. The day after the public confession, the city pulsed with a new kind of energy. Newspapers blazed with headlines. Evelyn Whitmore's truth exposed. Whitmore heiress breaks silence on corporate scandal. For once, Grace didn't feel small beneath those words. She wasn't a scandal anymore. She was a survivor, a woman who turned her mother's final words into a promise kept. Inside Whitmore Capital's headquarters, the atmosphere was calm but electric. Employees walked the marble halls with renewed pride. Transparency no longer felt like a slogan, it was real. Benjamin sat at his desk reading through letters from shareholders, most of them expressing admiration instead of outrage. When Grace walked in, he smiled with quiet relief. "Your mother's name is clear now," he said softly. "That's something I never thought I'd live to see." Grace took a seat across from him. "She never stopped protecting us, even after she was gone." Sanin. Benjamin leaned forward, studying her. "And you never stopped protecting her. You've done enough, Grace. Maybe it's time to live for yourself now." She smiled faintly. "That's the plan." Later that afternoon, Grace met Ethan in the lobby. He was standing near the towering Christmas tree, holding 2 cups of Starbucks coffee. "Non-fat latte for you," he said, handing her one. Grace grinned. "You remember?" "Of course," he said. "It's the one constant in this whole soap opera." Lum. They stepped outside together. The city glittered with holiday lights, bright and warm against the fading gray sky. Snowflakes drifted lazily, dissolving on their coats. They walked in silence until Ethan finally spoke. "I've been offered a position in D.C., he said quietly. "A new federal division, corporate ethics. They want someone who's seen the worst and still believes in good." Grace looked at him, trying to mask the sting of surprise. "That's incredible." He nodded. "It is. But I don't know if I want to leave." Her voice softened. "Because of me?" He smiled. "Because I don't think your story's over yet." Grace exhaled, snow catching in her lashes. "Ethan, every story has to end." "Maybe," he said. "But some stories just begin again in different places." They stopped at the edge of Central Park, where the lake had frozen over, reflecting the golden glow of streetlights. Families passed by, laughing, pulling sleds. For the first time in years, Grace saw joy without envy. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You could come with me," he said quietly. "Start fresh. New city, new life." Grace hesitated, her heart tugging in two directions. "I think my life just started here," she said. "But maybe it doesn't have to end here." He chuckled softly. "So, we'll call it to be continued." Grace smiled, her eyes warm. "Exactly. Duh." That evening, Benjamin hosted a quiet dinner at the Park Avenue penthouse. The dining table glowed under soft candlelight. Lena joined them, bringing her signature apple pie, the scent filling the room. Grace raised her glass of wine as her father spoke. "To Evelyn," Benjamin said, his voice thick with emotion. "To Truth, and to the daughter who reminded me what family means." They clinked glasses, laughter blending with the hum of jazz in the background. Grace felt her chest swell, not with pride, but with peace. For once, she wasn't chasing closure. She was living it. Later, standing by the window overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Grace felt Ethan's presence behind her. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "So this is what healing looks like," he murmured. She turned to him, her voice quiet. "It looks like finally being seen." Outside, the lights of the city shimmered like stars scattered across the earth. Grace had spent years walking through storms, but now the city that once broke her was shining for her. And for the first time, she believed she deserved every flicker of that light. A year later, New York glowed beneath a soft blanket of snow, the skyline shimmering against the December sky. The Plaza Hotel sparkled with gold ribbons and crystal lights, its grand lobby filled with music and laughter. Grace stood near the tall Christmas tree, the same one she'd walked past a lifetime ago when her world had been falling apart. Now, the air around her felt lighter, her heart steady. Life had rebuilt itself quietly, like snowfall layering over old scars. Whitmore Capital had become one of the most transparent corporations in the country. The Evelyn Whitmore Foundation funded scholarships for women in business across the U.S. And Grace, no longer hidden behind anyone's shadow, had found her rhythm. She now lived in a townhouse overlooking Central Park, where mornings began with coffee, laughter, and meetings that actually meant something. She'd never married again, but she wasn't alone either. As the orchestra played "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," Grace caught sight of Benjamin across the room. He was laughing with Lena, holding a glass of champagne, looking younger than he had in years. He saw Grace and raised his glass toward her, a silent toast of pride and peace. She smiled, her eyes soft. "Thinking about him?" a familiar voice asked. Grace turned. Ethan stood behind her, taller, sharper, in a navy tuxedo, his smile calm but warm. "He looks happy," she said. "He is," Ethan replied. "You gave him that?" Grace shook her head lightly. "We gave it to each other." They stepped aside as a waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes. The light caught the silver locket at Grace's neck, still her mother's, still her reminder. Ethan noticed it. "You still wear it?" She nodded. "It keeps me grounded. Every time I'm tempted to give up, I remember how much she fought for truth." Ethan smiled. "You did more than she ever imagined. The foundation's been nominated for a National Humanitarian Award. You've changed lives, Grace." She looked down, her voice soft. "Maybe that's what healing really means. Not forgetting, but using the pain for something that matters." He studied her quietly for a moment. "You know," he said, "I could have sworn this story was over last Christmas." Grace grinned. "So did I. But life doesn't end with justice, it begins after it." They moved toward the balcony, where snow drifted lazily through the open French doors. The city stretched before them: Central Park, a white sea, Fifth Avenue glowing with light. Grace leaned on the railing, breathing in the cold air. "Do you ever miss D.C.?" she asked. Ethan laughed. "Every time I have to pay New York rent." Then his tone softened. "But no, I don't. Because what I was looking for wasn't there." Grace turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "And what was that?" He stepped closer. "Someone who understands that power doesn't come from what we build, but from what we survive." The silence between them was warm, not fragile anymore. Grace didn't step back this time. "You know," she said quietly, "for a long time, I thought my story was about revenge. But it was really about rediscovery." Ethan smiled. "Then maybe it's time for a new chapter." She tilted her head. "What would we call it?" He took her hand gently, his thumb brushing the locket at her throat. "The Christmas Promise," he said. Grace's heart softened, her voice almost a whisper. "And what's the promise?" "That no matter what storms come," Ethan said, "you'll never walk through them alone again." The city lights shimmered around them, snow swirling like quiet confetti. Below, the streets of Manhattan pulsed with life, but up here, everything slowed: the hum of the world, the ache of the past, even time itself. Grace leaned into him, smiling through the glow of Christmas lights reflected in the window. "For the first time," she murmured, "that sounds like a promise I can believe in." And as midnight bells echoed over New York, Grace Evelyn Whitmore, once broken, once betrayed, finally stood where she belonged, not in anyone's shadow, but in the full, forgiving light of her own story. So, that's how Grace's story finally comes to an end. But if you're still here, right now, listening until this very moment, maybe something in her journey touched your heart too. Maybe it reminded you of your own moments of loss, of standing back up when life broke you, of finding light again after being buried in the dark. Grace's story isn't just about wealth or revenge, it's about healing, about choosing peace over anger. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And that's the truth. Healing begins the moment you decide to think differently about your pain. So, if you've ever been betrayed, forgotten, or underestimated, remember this: your story isn't over. Like Grace, you have the power to turn pain into purpose. Don't rush your healing. Trust it. One day, the same storm that almost destroyed you will become the reason you're unshakable. If this story touched you in any way, take a second to like, share, and subscribe, because somewhere out there, someone else needs this reminder too, that no matter how broken things feel right now, you can still rise again, stronger and softer than before.